the first person to speak will be
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was pleased to read last month that the Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough Council have started developing some brownfield sites in Bedworth into social housing, in particular the former garage sites on Ashington Road and Whitburn Road in Bedworth Heath. Could I ask the Cabinet member if he or she would look into the possibilities of developing the derelict land behind the Cricketers Arms in the Slough ward? Part of the land is owned by the council and has now been derelict for over a decade. It really would make an ideal place for a few council houses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Evans, for this question. I am extremely proud that this council, despite suffering massive financial pressures as a result of swinging cuts to the funding grant by this government, has in recent years managed to build council houses. I am also very excited that some of these houses, as Mr. Evans has pointed out, are in Heath Ward, a place where I live and represent as a councillor. I am proud that this Labour-run council is building truly affordable homes that are most certainly fit for human habitation. Surely no one would oppose that. I am also extremely delighted that NBBC has been awarded investment partner status by Homes England. We are one of the few authorities to have been awarded full status nationally and the only council in Warwickshire currently actively building our own new council houses. Regarding the specific piece of land that Mr. Evans refers to, I wrote to him some time ago setting out the council's position regarding the development of it. I gave him the same response that both he and Councillor Grand got when they met with officers in January of this year, and I'll say it again for this council tonight. The main piece of land being referred to is not in the council's ownership. The owners of the land are no longer in business and the land is being managed by the Crown. There is an attached piece of land which is in the council's ownership and is currently maintained by the Parks team. We are actively identifying land suitable for development. However, given the complexities associated with land ownership and more potential of some other areas, we are considering clarity of ownership, scale of sites, ease of access, etc. It is unlikely that this land will be considered for development in the medium to long term.
Thank you. Can I ask Brian Walmsley to make it?
Good evening, thank you. Recent issue on social media accused Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough Council of failing to apply for and get funding for building council houses and affordable housing from a government funding initiative. However, being an open-minded resident, I'd like to understand both sides of the issue. It all followed a press article quoting that the Department for Housing, Communities and Local Government returned £817 million of funding it said was no longer required in 2017-18. The vast majority of the money was supposed to have been spent on housing. The article also mentioned £2 billion to help councils and housing associations build social rent homes where they're most needed. Because such massive amounts were mentioned during the ensuing comments on the post, many people were questioning the ability of this council to obtain portions of these monies. Comments, actual quotes, none of it my grammar, included. Sounds to me like our council didn't even look into it. The money, if we had it, would be used on sites with planning permission that are unfinished and converting buildings that are unused. Are councillors not made aware of funding that's available? Do they not question how come some funding and others don't? It looks like money was available to councils and HAs for affordable housing. If this much needed funding was available, why on earth did no one around here apply for it? This opportunity appears to have been missed. Our councillors should be chasing every possible route to achieve what the public need. Did our very own Marcus Jones MP not make anybody at Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough Council aware of such available funding, despite the fact that he held the role of Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government from May 2015 to January 2018? The very department that gave back these vast amounts of money. It appears very strange to me that if this were real money that could have been available to help the people of Nuneaton Why was he not banging on the town hall doors and publishing it in the local press and ensuring that the good people of Nuneaton and Bedworth got a share of this particular government money tree for affordable housing? How can we find out in the press after his department returned the money to his government coffers? Is this another empty promise without content, like the unquantified Conservative £30 million development I've read in Conservative borough election pamphlets and manifesto? Due to the amount of questioning on the council and Facebook forums without any chance of reply, I thought it reasonable to raise the question tonight. So my question to council is, can you please clarify the issues raised in the press and comments raised on Facebook forums, so the people of Nuneaton and Bedworth can actually understand if there's real funding we missed, or if it was fake news that was not truly available funding opportunity. It would be very beneficial for the people to understand first-hand the council's position and understanding. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jackson, are you responding?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Renton, for your question. The reports in the press refer to £817 million of funding relating to affordable housing and other projects. At this point, there is no real detailed information regarding the details of what this funding relates to. I can advise you that central government funding is received in a variety of ways. Most commonly, funding is awarded via a predetermined formulation. As such, it is awarded and the council does not need to bid for it. There are, however, funding opportunities for which the council must bid. I am able to confirm that the council has successfully bid for £617,000 of funding for the new build homes at Kingsview, and it has also successfully bid for a further £120,000 of funding for the new properties in Ashington Road, Bedworth. Additionally, the council has successfully bid for a significant amount of funding to help tackle homelessness in our borough. Along with the other borough and district councils in Warwickshire, we were awarded over £1 million, and additionally, the Borough Council has also successfully bid for a further £75,000 for our borough. I can confirm that this council has not returned any funding it has received by whatever method for housing projects, and has diligently used this funding to increase the number of homes for rent, to improve homes for people with disabilities and help those who unfortunately find themselves homeless. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Michelle Clement, would you like to ask your question, please?
Thank you. Nuneaton and Bedworth has the lowest rate of enforcement action on planning in Warwickshire. It is alarming that there appears to be more reduction in the planning enforcement at a time when the Borough Council is planning to treble the rate of house building in the next few years. Back in November 2017, when the initial proposals for the budget for 2018-19 were put forward in the Cabinet papers, I was very concerned about the savings of £17,500 earmarked for planning enforcement. My question on this topic at the December Full Council was disallowed for having more than one part, but I did ask the question by email and received a written reply. After some explanation about the restructuring, the reply stated, and I quote, "In light of the above, we will be able to ensure that developers meet the conditions we attach to planning consents just as effectively in the future as we have in the past, but at less cost." A typical example of the lack of planning enforcement has been regarding the trees on Eastborough Way. The poor way the trees were being protected was highlighted to me, which led me to check the planning condition regarding tree protection. I established that this had not been adhered to, that is, inadequate fencing, lack of signage, amongst other things. Initially, I was told there had been no damage and that Barrett's were going to apply for a change to the condition, which I find totally unacceptable that could even be the case. The officer that was dealing with it has now been moved from planning enforcement duties, and the case has now been passed to the only officer currently carrying out enforcement for the whole borough. Planning enforcement have now acknowledged that there is an issue, and I hope action will be taken against Barrett's. What resources has the planning team got in place to check that conditions attached to a planning permission are adhered to, or are the conditions only looked at if someone raises an issue? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arlington.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The revised structure of the planning enforcement team will result in a team of 1 full-time equivalent planning enforcement officer and 0.8 full-time equivalent planning enforcement assistant. Alongside this, all the planning officers and other officers within the development control team have responsibilities to check that planning conditions are being complied with. This is an overall reduction of 0.2 full-time equivalent on the previous structure. In relation to the particular complaint that Mrs Condical raises, this has been investigated, which has included consultation with the Parks and Amenities team and will, if necessary, lead to formal enforcement action. However, government guidance suggests that formal action should be last resort and should follow discussions between the parties.
Thank you. Can I ask Steve Hay to ask his question, please?
Thank you. Is it true that the Conservative proposal to spend up to £30 million in Abbey Street is not costed and not at present legal?
Point of order, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, how can the Leader of the Council answer the question when either he has not been privy to discussions that I have had with officers, if he has been, there is a breach of member protocol, or he is making his answer up because he does not answer for the Conservative Party. Therefore, I don't believe the question is in order.
Well, he hasn't said anything yet. The question's been asked to the Leader of the Council. It's for the Leader of the Council to answer the question if he's able to. Councillor Harvey.
Mr Mayor, members may recall that the February budget setting meeting of the Council had to be stopped after Councillor Wilson talked about this £30 million when proposing his alternative budget. There were not, of course, any indications of this amount in the budget put forward by Councillor Wilson, and any such proposal would have been illegal without stating the source of funds for such an amount. Mr Mayor, as far as I can see, 30 million is a figure plucked from thin air. It has no legitimacy in that there is no indication of how this money would be found. Indeed, it would have to be borrowed. Of course, in their election leaflets, I see the Conservatives are going to lower car parking charges, lower market rents, lower burial costs, spend more on voluntary bodies, bring back the play rangers and keep older toilet blocks in operation. Wonderful. If Mr Hayes to believe all this, and that 30 million is available to spend on Abbey Street, I would remind him that the Conservatives ran this council for just 2 years, from 2008 to 2010. Mr Mayor, actions speak louder than words. With Marcus Jones as their leader, the Tories started their short period of control by closing toilets in Appleborough, Orkington and our town centre parks. They ended the long-running play scheme and they sacked our 2 town centre wardens. They did not reduce parking charges and they did not spend large sums on our town centres. I think local people, Mr Mayor, have longer memories than some in the opposition give them credit for.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Sorry.
Can I ask Anglo-Welling Nash to ask you a question, please? Sorry, I was busy because there was...
No, apologies, it was my fault. Okay. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Considering the damning appraisal by the Highways officer at the Borough Planning hearings of the EMP7 site due to highways and issues, and the site being right next to Goodyear's End School, why did the portfolio holder for the Borough Plan put the site in the plan before asking for County Highways' professional opinion? Your constituents deserve better.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have to say that Mrs Llewellyn Nash has tried to paint a very different picture to the reality of the situation. That reality, I'm happy to tell Mrs Llewellyn Nash, is that the County Council were indeed consulted. In fact, Highways were happy with the original proposals as detailed in the Infrastructure Development Plan published last year. The concerns relating to EMP7, the employment allocation of Bowling Green Lane, raised by Warwickshire County Council's Highway Authority at the local plan examination hearing, were as a result of Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough Council accepting at that hearing that part of the HSG6 School Lane housing site was no longer deliverable. The effect on the highway proposal from the withdrawal of part of the HSG6 for housing development had not been assessed at the time of the hearing. This is because the owner of that portion of the allocation, which was previously put forward for development, has now stated they do not want the land to be developed for housing, which is their one, Mr Mayor. This change was put forward at the examination, as that is the correct procedure. It was not known at the time of the consultation of the publication version of the plan in early 2017. The inspector has requested that Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough Council, together with Warwickshire County Council, provide further clarification of the highways issues and any further mitigation proposals. Any changes to the policy will be subject to a main modification, which will be subject to a 6-week period of public consultation, the results of which are then forwarded to the inspector. I can agree with Mrs Llewellyn-Nash on one thing though, Mr Mayor. The residents of this borough do deserve better. They deserve better from this government, from their local MPs elected to represent them, and they deserve better from the County Council, all of whom have abandoned the people of this borough and have let them down badly.
Should have gone to the hearing.
Okay, if we can move on to excuse me, item number 8, questions by members. First one, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question is to the Leader of the Council. At a time when this Council's new depot is £1.6 million overspent and still not fully operational, the car parking numbers and income are greatly reduced, the number of market stalls have declined, our town centres are a shadow of their former selves, the deeply unpopular borough plan is imposing thousands of houses...
What about North Drive Relief Roads?
I'm more than happy to expand the length on the North Drive Relief Road.
Councillor Wilson, can I just say, it may be that there's people in the public gallery that are not aware of how I conduct meetings. What I won't have is people disrupting the meetings. And so please take the friendly message, wherever we are in the chamber or the public gallery, people have got a right to ask questions, debate things and have a point of view. You might not like them, but let's respect their chance of saying it. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and that's why I'm the representative for Whitestone and not them. Anyway,
Councillor Wilson, isn't it?
But
Councillor Wilson, I thought I'd explained adequately. There's no need for the little aside to it. Just continue your question.
the deeply unpopular borough plan is imposing thousands of houses on areas ill-equipped to cope with the additional burden on schools, play areas and roads. And this Labour Council is cutting vital services on employment rights, toilets and taxing people to bury the dead. Does the leader believe it is appropriate to be cutting scrutiny of the actions of this council and the Labour executive?
Councillor Harbin.
Mr Mayor, I'm afraid it seems to me that Councillor Wilson misunderstands the proposal to cut the number of OSPs from 4 to 2. This is not cutting down on scrutiny opportunities for members, merely cutting the number of allowances for chairing committees and so saving the hard-pressed local taxpayer some money. There will still be 2 OSPs dealing with all the same aspects of the council's work as now. Any issue can be brought to those committees as it is now, Mr Mayor. There is no taking back the scrutiny.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to move a motion, as is permissible under the terms of the Constitution, following the question. I would like to move the following motion, and I have a copy for the officers if they want it. Scrutiny, holding the actions of the Cabinet to account, is a vital function of the work of this Council, and views the decision to halve the amount of scrutiny of the last full Council with great concern. This Council therefore resolves to reduce the in-touch budget by £9,000 and reinstates the full 4 scrutiny panels with immediate effect to ensure effective governance arrangements and the actions of this Council are held to account. Mr Mayor, it is absolutely diabolical that we are in a position where the executive turns around at Budgetary Council and determines how this council holds them to account. That isn't democracy. That is effectively an elected dictatorship. If Councillor Harvey's answer is to be believed, we're getting rid of 2 chairs and having the same amount of meetings, and we'll have the same amount of scrutiny. He obviously hasn't read the agenda that we have before us tonight, because if you look at page 78, and it goes by quarter, there are only 2 OSP meetings per quarter, not the 4 that we have at the present arrangements. Is he suggesting that scrutiny meetings will go on longer? Is he suggesting that we will have additional subcommittees? We don't know, because...
Councillor Wilson, you were proposing a motion.
I am,
You seem
yes.
to be debating it.
I'm allowed to speak to move the motion.
But the motion, it doesn't comply with the Constitution.
It does.
It doesn't.
I'd like to hear the legal officer's ruling on that, then, please.
I'm ruling it doesn't comply with the Constitution. It's quite clear, it's within your agenda.
The Constitution allows you to move a motion on the
Constitution-
basis of any question asked and amended by a
Councillor
question.
Wilson, I'm in the chair.
You
I'm
obviously
saying,
don't know the Constitution,
I
then.
do, and I'll be happy to accept your apologies once I explain it.
It'll be a cold day in hell, then, Mr. Mayor.
Tweet that one.
Your
Disgraceful
motion-
behaviour. What was shocking is you cutting scrutiny.
Excuse me, please. Please be sure, if this meeting continues to be interrupted, I will deal with it. I've made a statement to Councillor Wilson. He clearly doesn't understand it because he hasn't allowed me to explain it. I've said it is within the Constitution, it's within the agenda that's printed in front of him. However, I'll read it out to him. In fact, I'll tell you the page. It's page 74, at the bottom, 410.6, request to speak on the matter. Arising from the question and the response or supplementary response given with any other member of the council, any other member of the council may request to move a motion. That isn't you. You've already spoken. It has to be any other member.
You've allowed me to pass, so you're not being consistent.
No, I haven't. I have not. So, in that form, it does not comply with the Constitution. Councillor Connick.
Can I move a motion, please, Mr.
I'll call Councillor Connick.
Well, I was going to do what Claire was doing, and I would like to move the motion that Chris suggested. Okay? Okay, Mr. Mayor?
So you're moving...
I'm doing this motion.
Yes, the one that you borrowed, okay.
You want to read it out again, Mr. Mayor?
Well, it's your motion. You can either move it or not move it.
Okay. Scrutiny, holding the actions of the council to account, is a vital function of the work of this council, and the views and decision to halve the amount of scrutiny at the last full council is of great concern. This council therefore resolves to reduce the in-touch budget by £9,000 and to reinstate the full 4 scrutiny panels with immediate effect to ensure effective governance, amendments and the actions of this council are held to account. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That's seconded.
I'll second the motion, Mr. Mayor, and reserve my right to speak now.
Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Scrutiny is a vital form of action by this council, and to have the executive determining how this council does the scrutinising of the executive is completely unacceptable. When you look at the timetable of meetings, there's only £2 per quarter. We used to have 4. Now, Councillor Harvey may have decided amongst the Labour group how scrutiny is going to function. They may put forward a motion. It's not on the agenda. But any changes to the scrutiny arrangements require constitutional amendments as to how the scrutiny arrangements will happen. What they're going to do, what they're going to form of. At the moment, all we know is Thursday the 7th of June, OSP 1. Is it held? We don't know. Similarly, Thursday the 5th of July, OSP number 2. What's that going to consider? We don't know, because they haven't told us. They've made up policy on the back of a fact packet. And it is the councillors of this authority, but more importantly, the residents of this authority who are being shortchanged by this decision. Now, I would rather see the money from the In Touch reduced, because the In Touch is effectively a propaganda tool from this council. I'm sure residents would have been far more happier knowing that we are scrutinising all the things which I mentioned in my question, like taking funding away from advice rights, like the car parking charges declining, like the fall in the footfall, as opposed to a retirement shindig from Councillor Harvey on a 2-page spread. That, as far as I'm concerned, is a waste of taxpayers' money. What is spending council taxpayers' money wisely is actually holding Councillor Harvey and his cabinet, or whoever it will happen to be, after May the 3rd, to account. That is the right and proper way of conducting business, dealing with scrutiny on a cross-party basis. Labour does not have the monopoly on deciding how scrutiny is done. And I believe that there are, despite our political differences, a number of people who are actually on the Labour backbenches who are quite disheartened and concerned about the changes which are happening to scrutiny, because now more than ever we need effective scrutiny on all fronts, with this council being faced with challenges all over the place. And it is scrutiny that helps either improve policy, put policy forward for the council to consider, like we're considering later tonight with the lanterns, not this mishmash back of a fag packet proposal we have from Councillor Harvey. If this is his legacy, then I'm sure that many residents will be glad that this is his last meeting, because this isn't democracy, it's a sham.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. I don't have the motion in front of me, but regarding the In Touch magazine, I was contacted just this week by an elderly housebound couple by letter. In the letter they stated that they'd got my contact details from the In Touch magazine, and so I'm going to be voting against the motion, and I'd ask others to do the same.
Thank you. Want to respond? Councillor? No, it's not. Sorry,
Councillor Golding.
Oh, she did. I'm happy to apologise. Councillor Darby.
Just on the condensing of the OSPs, I don't honestly see how we can manage it. I know that the Deputy Mayor has been present in some of the scrutiny meetings that I've been chairing, and they do tend to go on quite a while. But we do talk about extremely serious issues like homelessness. Are we just going to sweep things on at that side for the lighter agenda of 2 OSPs instead of the 4 that we've got? We talk about some serious and significant issues in the borough, and it is limiting what we can actually discuss in a non-political forum where we can actually sit there and discuss things that are important to residents, and that residents can come along and join in, and that we can actually get people in from the areas where we're discussing. I brought in people from homeless charities. We were in the health OSP. We had people from the CCG, and we've had people from public health. We've had the head of Coventry and Warwickshire Hospital. These are all things that we as a council should be expanding on, not shutting down. How are we ever going to get a public view which involves other public bodies if we are cutting down scrutiny? Because they can't come to areas like this and discuss things. It is an open forum for discussion, not a forum for debate in this manner. And I think it is wrong to actually shut it down when there are other options to keep it in a wider vein and more meetings, or at least the number of meetings that we have currently.
Councillor Harvey, do you wish to respond?
Well, just on In Touch, Mr Mayor, Victoria's like In Touch when it's their In Touch that they distribute, say, the Conservatives In Touch. But first of all, we, and me as the leader, did not start the opinion in Touch in the leaders column. It was Marcus Jones. Before he became leader, I never did that. He did it, followed by Peter, what was his name? Gilbert, for the next 12 months. And I just carried on, so I just took the example from the Tories. But Mr Mayor, first of all, it's up to the new council in May, not this council, in relation to what each of those different OSPs will be. And nowhere does it say these shall be the only meetings of the OSPs, because in fact, under the Constitution, extra meetings can be called. So nowhere does it say these shall be the only meetings. That is the fact that they're in the diary so that people can make plans. But you can call extra meetings, Mr Mayor. Going back some time, when we first set this council up, meetings used to start at 9 o'clock in the morning, and they used to go on sometimes till 8 or 9 o'clock at night. They were too long, I've got to admit, but people were prepared to sit and discuss the matters. So nobody's saying they're limited, nobody's saying that's just a small amount of meetings. And Mr Mayor, I do hope we can continue the council without any further personal abuse.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded, the motion, that all members will understand it's been read out twice. All those in favour... Call a recording vote, please.
Mr Mayor, I will read out the names of each member who will indicate if they are for or against the motion. Councillor Aldington.
Against.
Councillor Beaumont.
Against.
Councillor Bennett. Apologies. Councillor Bonner. Apologies. Councillor Brindley Edwards. Councillor Copland.
Against.
Councillor Deffin.
Against.
Councillor Doughty. Apologies. Councillor Elliott.
Against.
Councillor Gizane.
For.
Councillor Glass.
Against.
Councillor Golby.
For.
Councillor Graham.
For.
Councillor Gutteridge. For. Councillor Hancox.
Against.
Councillor Harvey.
Against.
Councillor Haynes.
Against.
Councillor Jackson.
Against.
Councillor Kondaka.
For.
Councillor Terry Lloyd. Apologies. Councillor Ian Lloyd.
Against.
Councillor Longden.
Against.
Councillor Margrave.
Against.
Councillor Phillips. Both apologies. Councillor Gwyn Pomfret.
Against.
Councillor Margaret Pomfret.
Against.
Councillor Jill Shepherd. Councillor Tracy Shepherd.
Against.
Councillor Smith. Apologies. Councillor Tandy.
Against.
Councillor Troman's apologies. Councillor Watkins.
Against.
And Councillor Wilson.
For. Okay, that agree it's lost. So motion is lost. We can move on to the second question. Councillor Condacor.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I believe the council setting up the Health Overview and Scrutiny Panel has been a big success. The council has legal rights to scrutinise local health services, but can also choose to ignore health services. We need to debate, strange statement actually, we need to debate this and not sleepwalk into weakening the borough's fight to defend the local NHS services where appropriate. We are about to have very significant changes to the local NHS as a result of the so-called STP work streams, which are progressing to a point where information is going to be placed in the public domain. Not all these changes will be detrimental to residents and the embedded, but some could result in services being relocated or rationed. I'm sure that councillors are willing to serve on a dedicated health overview and scrutiny panel without additional allowance or expense. Likewise, I know we would get someone, councillor or independent person, to chair such a panel without significant cost. Will the leader be willing to look at how we can keep an effective health scrutiny function? Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Harvey.
Mr Mayor, it seems to me that Councillor Condacor also misunderstands our proposal to cut the number of OSPs from 4 to 2, but this evening we've seen an obviously liaison between the two groups. This is not cutting down on scrutiny opportunities for health matters. Those are often dealt with external bodies such as George Eliot and Warwickshire county council and so on. Now it seems to me quite reasonable that one of these OSPs, although this will be up to the annual council, that one of these OSPs could deal with internal matters and one could deal with external matters that are not directly run by the council but which affect all the residents. So health could be quite easily dealt with by an external OSP. So I see no reason whatsoever that health scrutiny is cut down on. In fact, probably, with what's happening in the health service, more of it is needed, Mr Mayor. All we're trying to do is save the taxpayer a bit of money. I thought Councillor Condalka might have welcomed that.
Supplementary question.
I'm not allowing any supplementary questions tonight, considering the number of questions and the amount of business we've done. Question number 3, Councillor Margrave.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Over the years that I've served in this chamber, many residents have raised their concerns with me regarding potholes in the roads and the condition of some parts of our town centres, not to mention the issue with the bollards. While this, in many respects, is a matter for the Conservative-run County Council, it's an issue that really concerns people in our borough, and it deserves a voice in this chamber on behalf of local people who often speak to me and others here and are alarmed at the worsening situation. As a driver myself, I've noticed too that the roads being left in an increasingly poor condition, and have myself had to have my wheels rebalanced or repaired because of the impact of potholes. The situation cannot continue. Our roads and pavements here in Nuneaton and Bedworth seem to be deteriorating, and while I appreciate we've had difficult weather, it's no excuse. For years now, roads have been left or filled in poorly, only to have the problem again, only very soon after. While this may well be an issue of cuts in local funding to local authorities by the Conservative government, recently when I travelled to the south of the county, I noticed that the roads there seem to be in a much better condition than here. Nuneaton and Bedworth always seems to lose out in Warwickshire, and I would ask the leader of the council to write to the leader of the Tory-run county council over in Warwick to raise this issue and remind her where Nuneaton and Bedworth is. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Mr Mayor, councillors and indeed local residents may well remember that local roads used to be kept in a much better condition. This was when Nuneaton and Bedworth Council acted as the highways agency for this area and spent the grant funding in areas where local knowledge and experience helped in deciding how limited funds were spent. Since the county took this function away from us, the state of our roads has gone from bad to worse. We are now seemingly almost forgotten. Whilst, as Councillor Margrave states, it seems the south of the county enjoys a better standard. I am confident that local people will see that the county Tory leaders' aim of abolishing district councils and running all services from Warwick would be a mitigated disaster for Nuneaton and Bedworth. I will certainly write to her as Councillor Margrave suggests, but I don't hold out much hope of an improvement in our roads. I have been asking the county for 10 years, to update road signs in Nuneaton Town Centre which point to the wrong location for shop mobility. So don't hold your breath on potholes.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
It's a question for the leader. What would you do if you had to travel miles to go to the toilet to avoid soiling yourself or having to be changed on a dirty toilet floor or in the back of a car? That's the choice which some people who live and visit our borough face. Specialist disabled changing facilities, not like standard disabled toilets. People with profound disabilities, either physical or mental, often need extra specialist equipment like a height-adjustable adult-sized changing bench, a hoist, and a space either side for 2 carers to allow them to use toilets safely, comfortably and with dignity. We do not have a single public facility like this in our borough. In fact, the nearest ones to us are either Cawley Services or Hinckley Town Centre. Perhaps the ruling group could use some of the millions of pounds of Section 106 money generated by all the construction in the borough, either current or in the near future, to put some funding into converting the existing toilet facilities set to close into fully accessible public changing facilities for our disabled residents and visitors.
Thank you. Councillor Longman, I believe this is your portfolio, yeah?
It is indeed, Mr Mayor, thank you. When I first saw this question, I thought the fairies had been out to sprinkle dust on the tourism and given them a social conscience. Then I realised there's an election in a couple of weeks, so...
My friend has got a severely disabled son who requires these sorts of facilities. Please don't be disparaging.
Councillors.
I'll be as disparaging as I like because we get exactly from the same from you. I'm not arguing with you, I'm answering you.
Councillor Longden.
I'm answering you.
Councillor Longden, please give me a moment. Councillor Goldman. There's no need for that stuff across the chamber like that. Well, I know we've all got broad shoulders, but we don't need to have it across the chamber like that. There's been a question, and hopefully there's going to be an answer. We'll have it like that. If there's any other personal disagreements or problems within the council, then there's the proper routes to take it. Speak to the councillor afterwards about it, or raise the matter with the managing director. Councillor Longden.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Mayor, I was going to say something else, but I'll see her afterwards because I think it's important. She doesn't have a monopoly on this. There does seem also to be a problem with the short-term members of the tourism in this chamber, and the long-term members if it comes to that. It was only 2 months ago when we had to put through a budget that nobody on this side wanted, and that budget had savings forced on us by the government's austerity cuts. And yet here we have a question that wants to spend far more money than we can actually save. For many years the Tories, nationally and locally, have accused Labour of spending money we don't have. That wasn't true, but the Tories now seem to think it's such a good idea that they've now adopted that policy for themselves, all over the place. Would we like to implement changing places, toilet facilities? Yes, we would, and that's what it's called, Councillor Golby, because you didn't know. You haven't got it in your question.
Councillor Golby. Councillor Golby. Go afterwards. Councillor Longden.
You bet your life we would. Are we able to? No, we are not, because we don't have the money to do it. The Tories need to stop living in denial of what their government's austerity cuts are doing to this authority and many others across the country. And it's about time they faced up to the consequences of that and lived in the real world, instead of coming up with cockamamie ideas, just for electoral consequence. The other worrying thing about this question, Mr Mayor, is the fact that the Tories don't appear to know what the rules are surrounding Section 106 monies. They think somehow there's a vault in the cellar which got millions of pounds in it, which it hasn't. And the actual government rules and the planning legislation that's been put through since 2010 in terms of 106 money, it has to be site-specific, it has to be tied into developments, and if it's not spent within a specific time scale, it has to be returned to the developer. Your planning representatives or planning application representatives should know that, and so should you, because that's what the rules are and that's what's laid down. So they just didn't have access to this money that you're saying, and you're not put forward anything that I've ever heard, certainly on a planning commission. Finally, the Tories track record on disabilities in 2020 is absolutely appalling. They've treated disabled people with disdain, so to suddenly show concern when in reality you couldn't really care less, smacks of gutter politics for electoral gain, which hopefully people in this borough will not fall for. If you want something to do, go and see your friend the MP, and get him to go and see Philip Hammond in the Chancery of the Exchequer, and see what they've got to say about it. Let them get rid of some of this money that they're building up for the election in 2022. Because that's what's happening. Even my wife knows that, and she's not really politically astute. She's not stupid, but she's not that stupid. So you ask them to make a provision and ring fence it for this borough and for every town in the country. Let's see where we go with that. And you won't get it.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move a motion on the back of that. That this council directs the planning policy team to investigate the possibility of adult disabled changing policies within the town centre as part of the borough plan refinements. In moving the motion, Mr. Mayor, despite the attacks by the portfolio holder, who obviously doesn't remember that it was William Hay, when he was Disabilities Minister, who actually introduced the Disability Discrimination Act, a Conservative MP, which introduced the Disability Discrimination Act, which would not have been possible and builds on the foundations of all the disability discrimination legislation that we have to date. Obviously he doesn't want to admit that or remember that, but it is a historical fact. What it is perfectly in order to do, as part of the borough planning process, is to actually, as part of refinements, whether it be a supplementary planning document regarding the town centre specifically, or making modifications to the proposals for the town centre when the report comes back from the inspector, is to actually say that this is a policy that we want to pursue for the future. That is perfectly legitimate and is perfectly in order for us to look at moving forward as a council. Now, there may be possibilities for Section 106 monies, but what the answer we've had tonight tells me is the portfolio holder hasn't even investigated. He hasn't looked at the question, tried to look at the real meaning behind it, the caring meaning behind it, and instead goes on the attack at the expense of the people who are actually most affected. That is a disgrace of an answer from the portfolio holder, when Councillor Golby, and I can speak from personal experience, actually has a vested interest and cares deeply about this matter, and for someone on the other side of the chamber to make personal accusations is despicable, Mr. Mayor, when she is trying to look after people who are some of the most vulnerable in our society. That just goes to show the priorities of this council. They're more interested in going on the attack than actually doing the right thing by our residents and looking at putting forward these future policies which will actually help protect people and the most vulnerable going forward. Now, will they put their vote where their mouth is and actually vote to have our planning policy team look at this and look at what policies they can put forward, or will they sit on their hands and ignore the issue? I suspect that actually most people over there would want to look at doing this, but might be frightened because they think there's an election coming up and don't want to be seen to be doing the right thing because it's a Conservative proposal. Get over it, vote for the right thing, and let's look at doing the right thing for our residents, those who are the most vulnerable. If you really care, vote for it.
Is the motion seconded?
I'll second that, please, and reserve my right to speak.
Councillor Howden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Wilson talks about the borough plan. Well, unfortunately, it's a little bit too late for that because it's with the inspector currently. We won't get that the result from the inspector until later on this year when it is a new council. I would suggest that new council looks at that, Mr. Mayor, because we can't make those decisions. It's with the inspector currently. In fact, it's not our borough plan at the moment, it's the inspector's borough plan. And until he, and it is a he, delivers his report, we can't make any modifications to that.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
I'd just like to reiterate some of what Councillor Allington has said, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I will be voting against this proposal because that is not the correct way of dealing with the matter. It doesn't mean that we're against these type of toilets. It means that that is not the correct way. We have to wait for the borough plan to come back, and I'm sure that many of us sympathise with this situation and would want that to be looked at in the future if funds are available. But I think this is not the correct way that Councillor Wilson is putting forward, so I will vote against it on this occasion.
Councillor Margaret.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I'd like to say that I think, looking back on the video, I'm sure we'll all see that what Councillor Wilson moved was actually possibly not the correct wording that he intended to move. There were a few words that I think he got incorrect. Just trying to help you out. But in relation to this particular issue, Mr. Mayor, I support having changing places toilets within our borough. It's an issue that I've raised at OSP on a number of occasions. And I'm very concerned that Councillor Wilson is politicising such an important issue. No, just before elections, when you've had many years to raise this issue, and I understand that officers are looking at this because I have raised it. All the councillors and this authority has a public sector equality responsibility in order to deliver such things. And so I support officers going away to look at this, but I don't support this motion, and I'm very concerned at the idea that we use 106 monies. But I am aware that officers and Cabinet have already previously, so they are looking at this, and it isn't, as Councillor Wilson used once, an ambition. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Aspiration, sorry.
Councillor Duncan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. It's been said this is the wrong way of doing it. Well, the right way of doing this would be to have a decent and working borough plan process. A process which has taken 12 years and cost £4 million. If we had proper consultations and proper scrutiny meetings over the last 12 years, hopefully we wouldn't have been going 12 years. But one of the things that would have happened with proper scrutiny of the borough plan is people could have put ideas in, and ideas could have been actually make a difference to the plan. We had the In Touch newspaper sent out the day the last consultation closed.
Councillor Conlon, you're drifting again into all your normal local plan issues.
No.
There's a motion being moved that I want you to talk to.
I am talking to the motion.
You're not talking to it, you're talking about the local plan.
The motion is to put disabled toilets in the local plan. People wanted to consult on the local plan. We mentioned the In Touch was out the day after the consultation closed, and the right place, as Dennis Harvey says, this is not the right place to put it in, but the right place to put it in would have been during that consultation that people didn't know about because the Borough Plan In Touch newspaper.
We're talking about the issue that Councillor Goldby has raised the question on, and not the local plan. You quite rightly explained it should have been put in at that time. Councillor Aldington has also explained it is now in the hands of the local plan inspector. We're dealing with the question and the motion that's been put in front of us. Thank you. Councillor Goldby.
Am I being stopped now from speaking? Don't have 3 minutes.
Councillor Goldby.
Don't have 3 minutes.
Councillor Goldby.
I just feel the need to defend myself somewhat from those comments. This is not about elections. I'm not for elections. I don't care. I mean, you can sit there and laugh. I mean, it's hilarious because my residents are going to see this. So you laugh it up as much as you want because I'm going to make sure every one of them sees this because this question has come from my residents because I do talk to people. I've got people in my area that don't come to this town because there's nowhere to take their relatives to the bathroom. You think that's funny? Laugh it up because they don't. You walk out of that town centre and you see how many severely disabled people are outside at the town centre. In the shops, there aren't many there because they cannot get here due to the lack of facilities. Once they are here, they are neglected. Want of a better word, neglected. This is on our watch. I don't care who takes credit for this. I just want it done. I just think we should all be doing this. You know, put your name on it. Put a big red rosette over the door. Don't care. But the fact is that our residents can't even have the basic dignity of using the toilet. And you think that's funny. I mean, seriously, you should be ashamed. You should be ashamed of yourselves.
Mr. Mayor.
No.
I never laughed. And
I'm sorry, Councillor Harvey, but I wasn't actually looking at you.
No, let's just look. I'm going to try and calm things down again a bit. I know, Councillor Goldby, let me say what I'm going to say. I do know who you're referring to.
I'm not sure that you do, because I know more than one disabled person.
No, I meant to the person.
Oh, the councillor.
The person that
okay.
allegedly laughing. Let's
Yeah,
put it like that.
yeah. Hopefully it's on Councillor Connicle's video.
Okay, let's go back to the motion.
Yeah, yeah.
Try and move on.
So again, like I said, we are generating in this borough significant sums of money from 106 monies. We have developments within the town that we could actually request 106 monies for development in the town. You said in it you need an earmarked site. I've already said the toilets that are actually being closed, that's an earmarked site. We do have significant sums of money that we could take a small amount of money to put the adult changing facilities. This could be developer funded. If you looked at it in the right way, it could be developer funded. McCarthy and Stone, they are an over 55s retirement development. They are going to have people with specific needs, I'm sure, at some point. And let's just bear in mind that when we talk about disabilities, it's not the elderly or the people born with disabilities. We are all one car crash away from being permanently disabled. Just let that sink in. You are one bad accident away from not being able to go to the toilet yourself and not being able to go to the toilet in your own town centre. So that should stick with everybody in this room, because it's our responsibility to do something about that. I work in Hinckley. I was out in the town centre in Hinckley today, and there were people who had disabilities, and I looked at those people and I knew why they were there, because they can't come here.
Thank you. Councillor Pomfrey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Being told that I don't care for people with special needs, I really think that is beyond the pale. A number of things I'd just like to say is, well, first of all, site-specific. We're talking about section 106. That means there's this site, it gets planning approval, and any benefits accruing from the section 106 monies has to go to that specific site. That's what site-specific means. I'm not a planner, obviously, but that's my rather limited, but I think fairly accurate, interpretation. Also, before we start splashing money around, section 106 from the McCarthy and Stone development, there isn't any, because they said they couldn't afford it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Cope.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm one that can have a rant in this chamber, as anyone will know. I'm sorry, this is definitely a subject that I don't think rants get us anywhere. So I certainly won't be doing that. When I look at the question, and I'm not going to look at motives as to what and why and who's put forward, but what we're talking about is an extremely serious matter. And it would be a much, much needed facility, or is a much, much needed facility. I haven't got a problem with this council in whatever way, because it's been suggested that this is the wrong way to go about it with whatever has been proposed. There's been that much shouting over the chamber that I've lost track of where we are on this. But one thing I would like is that this council look at the issue. Now, the word aspiration was a great one that was used, and okay, you know, we can all have aspirations, as I said at the last council. But there's nothing wrong with having an aspiration that we could make this happen. I'll confess, I don't know a lot about the subject, but it's a much needed facility, and I'm quite happy, Mr. Mayor. I don't know how we would go about it or how we would start the ball rolling, but I'm quite happy. Let's all calm down. I accept that normally I'm the fella that has to calm down more than most, but I'm quite calm about this, and I'm thinking, let's somehow get our heads together and have this as, yeah, an aspiration, but let's see how we can achieve this facility.
Councillor Ian Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just going to follow on Councillor Copeland and what he was just saying. We've all dealt with learning disabilities, disabled people over many, many years within this authority, and it is a serious issue. But it is the wrong place to be bringing it up. And I think the place to be bringing it up is at a scrutiny committee where you can genuinely look at issues. Now, God forbid me a cabinet member suggesting that, but that's the place to do this, not at full council.
Could I move an amendment, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I'll still have two of the speakers, but yes. Councillor Hartley.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move an amendment that this matter is a report is done by the officers in relation to this matter, and this comes to the first meeting of the relevant OSP dealing with health matters straight after your council.
Second is.
member wish to speak on the amendment? Okay. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just wanted to second Councillor Margrave's comment that he has raised this for discussion at the Health OSP. We've all researched the changing places, we're fully behind them, so bringing it to a OSP, brilliant.
Okay, I'm told that the time according to the Constitution has moved on from that. We do have an amendment to the initial motion, which was that a report by officers be made on the subject and that it would come back to the first meeting of the relevant OSP. That was moved and seconded. All those in favour? All those in favour of the amendment? Any against? Any abstentions? I think it was unanimous anyway. So that becomes a substantive motion. Okay, again, so that, as I've just said, that the report by officers come back to the first relevant overview scrutiny panel. All those in favour of that? Okay, that's unanimous, thank you. Right, Councillor Shepherd. Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My questions for the leader of the council. With the Conservative government removal of free school meals to families earning more than 7,400, and with more families in this borough visiting food banks and struggling, can I ask the leader the impact this is having on the borough's children, and request he wrote to all three Conservative MPs to vote for this cut, and ask them to explain why they supported this vote? Mr Mayor.
Mr Mayor, this government seems intent to do all it can to hit the poor in our society. In one of the richest countries in the world, people have to queue for food at food banks, and they have to walk to work because they cannot afford the bus fare. As a council, we are spending unprecedented sums on trying to house the homeless, and now poorer families are threatened with even more attacks as many lose their right to school meals. I believe that the government, and in particular the Cabinet, made up of largely multimillionaires, have no concept of how ordinary people live, and this proposal is yet another example of their lack of knowledge of how many people struggle to get by. Certainly I will write to our three local MPs on the matter, as Councillor Shepherd suggests, but I have my doubts as to whether they will listen.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott.
Point of order, Mr Mayor. Can I just ask a question that I believe has actually gone over the allotted time for members' questions? This was actually brought up at the last full council and we denied the opportunity to go on. So in the interest of consistency, I'd like to ask for a check.
In the interest of consistency, I've just asked the same question to be advised with about 5 to 2 minutes then. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. With the shambolic introduction of universal credit, many residents across Nuneaton and Bedworth, including many who are in work, have been left without sufficient income for a lengthy period of time. This is obviously causing unnecessary suffering to families, but my question concerns whether there has been any knock-on effect to the council. It is common knowledge that this council has been hit with a massive 60% cut to central government funding since 2010. But can the leader tell me whether the introduction of universal credit has had any impact on council budgets?
Mr Mayor, I can tell Councillor Elliott that since the introduction of universal credit, and particularly since the introduction of full service from October 2017, the council has seen an increase in the level of rent arrears in its housing revenue account. The percentage of rent collected in 2017-18 was 95.93% compared to over 97% the year before universal credit was introduced. We currently have around 5% of tenants on universal credit, and they account for almost a quarter of the total outstanding debt. The bad debt provision for the HRA has increased by around £50,000 for last year, and the HRA has also invested in additional resources in the Council's debt recovery and financial inclusion teams to provide additional support to customers and minimise the impact on Council finances. All of that, Mr Mayor, is costing us £125,000 per year. So not only has it, as Councillor Elliott suggested, hit the families, it's also hit the general person who is paying council rent or tax.
Okay, thank you. Can I apologise to the three people still wanting to ask questions? We've exhausted the time that's allocated for this section of the agenda.
Mr Mayor, I'm very unlucky. I didn't get my answer last time. Do you think they could reply to my question, please, in the next day or two? Thank you.
I would expect that to be done, and if it wasn't done last time, then nobody has informed me that it was.
Yeah, it was done last time. It was done, yeah.
Right, okay. Yeah. Takes us on to item 9, special urgency decisions. None?
That's gone, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Item number 10, urgent decisions. Review the scrutiny committee procedure rule. This is for information purposes only. Councillor Harvey?
Well, Mr Mayor, these have all been to councils before. This is just the annual list of what's been stated before.
Okay, item number 11.
Point of order.
So I didn't see you, Councillor Conley, but you're still sitting in your chair.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just want to say, can we actually comment on things we're supposed to note for information, because we haven't had a single call in for 4 years. So I think it does say review if necessary.
Councillor, you're still talking to item 10. We moved on to item 11.
I have my hand up.
Timetable of meeting.
Move it, Mr Mayor.
Second that.
Seconded. Councillor Margrave.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As you're aware, this is my last full council meeting, along with others, as I need to focus on my academic work. Before speaking to the issue itself, I just want to say it's been an honour and privilege to serve the young people of Attleborough on these benches, and I've worked hard to give my neighbours, friends, family and community a voice.
Point of order.
And I'm proud of what I've achieved. But focusing on time...
Councillor Margrave, just give me a moment. Councillor Conley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do hope if I'm going to be forced to keep up to topic, that Councillor Margrave is forced to keep to topic.
I'll make sure it happens, Councillor Conley. I hope you're not suggesting that I'm unfair to yourself or other people. I do try my best. Councillor Margrave.
I know that I've gone off topic in the past, but I haven't gone on...
Can you stick to the...
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've never gone that off topic. Mr Mayor, I am leading on to the issue of timetabling and its relationship to politics. So when Tony Benn stood down, he said he was going to devote more time to politics. And it's something I intend to do. Politics is important, and it's something that doesn't just exist in political parties or council chambers. It isn't something that we should keep to ourselves. Community activism and the voices of all our residents, businesses and stakeholders is the lifeblood of a functioning democracy and successful democratic process. And that's why I'm speaking in relation to timetabling. This council has a proud history of allowing public speaking and question times. And we've got people along in the gallery this evening. It's just a shame often at OSPs, for example, there aren't more people that come along. And And what I'm suggesting, Mr Mayor, is that I would like to see this council even more accessible, because there's always more that we can do. And therefore, I'm urging the new council to reflect on this timetable and future timetables to consider whether meetings at 4 p.m. or 5 p.m. are any longer suitable. If we want to make democracy accessible to those with work commitments or with children, why not look to other councils who have meetings at a set time later in the evening, say 6:30? Or even, why not have council meetings or OSPs at the weekend when people could come along readily? Why not take these council meetings out to the community? Now, I appreciate there are budget constraints, and I believe that there is no price on democracy. And because I am whipped, and I've always been loyal to the Labour Party on these benches, as I'm sure some of you are over there, I will be supporting the timetable of meetings, but I would say this, from somebody on their way out to some of the people on their way in, I would urge you to think carefully about the timing of meetings so that you ensure that people who work and with childcare commitments can attend meetings, because 4 p.m. or 5 p.m. makes it incredibly hard to serve as a councillor and for also the public to attend. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. The OSPs are really, really important. As Councillor Margrave says, he wishes more people come and talk to them. And obviously meetings that go on for 5 hours aren't going to be very conducive to it. I've been trying to mention, but not allowed to, how brilliant the health OSC is, and I think we need on here, on this timetable, meetings to discuss health. Put in advance, so we actually have a timetable for health scrutiny. Whatever you call it, however you work out the chairs, whether, we need the 5 or 6 health scrutinies through the year, because we are coming to such a point where the STPs are going to make massive changes, and we've just managed to get Andrew Hardy to an OSP. It took a lot of work from the officers, and I know Councillor Shepherd was struggling as well and hoping he'd come. And that was a very successful OSP. And if we don't have health OSPs on this diary of events, they may not happen and they won't get enough focus. I also talk about planning a lot, because planning meetings get really busy, as you well know, at some times of year. But also the slack times, just after Christmas and things. And so I think, rather than having 17, I know it's a massive commitment to do about 17 planning meetings a year. I think we should keep the 3 weeks between planning meetings and then have a longer gap over holidays, because we have some good planning meetings where you only have 1 item on the agenda, and we have some really busy ones. Also, it was mentioned, well, don't worry, because we can now call extra meetings. Having extra meetings is a real pain, because people book holidays, they plan as a good councillor, beginning of the year, they stick this on the wall, and they plan their lives around, I'm on health, or I'm on whatever, I'm on planning, and they work out when to go away. So having split up committees and meetings about stuff is not helpful. So I say we should put more meetings on this schedule so that we actually have some slots to do stuff, some slots to discuss the borough plan, and some slots to discover health. And we mentioned In Touch earlier, that tells people when these meetings are, and actually if a meeting's got a theme, if it's a health meeting, it does help for those people who don't get an election leaflet from Trishirley, but rely on In Touch to find out when and what's going on, to actually know it's a health meeting at the beginning of June or whenever. So I think we need a better thing, and I think this needs to be left over almost to the next council and actually have some proper working parties to work this out, not have a scrutiny timetable imposed by the controlling group. Because the controlling group stops us talking so often. We've had virtually no call-ins. Well, I think we've had no calls for 4 years. So scrutiny is really, really important. And if we have enough scrutiny meetings, we won't make the horrendous cost overruns like the crime wall and the depot. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Mayor, sorry. A lot of what Councillor Condacor has said, and actually what Councillor Margrave has said, I have a great deal of sympathy for. It's not often I agree with Councillor Margrave. I think it's usually on the issue of disabilities and on this, but I think there's a degree of commonality on this. 5 o'clock meetings are difficult for people, and particularly actually on planning is one of the most contentious committees. I think every one of us who has served on planning knows It's one of the most contentious, and someone always wins and someone always loses. And that is the committee actually which gets the most attendance. I agree that we would actually like more people to attend the overview and scrutiny to actually dig deeper into the issues which go on in the council. And sometimes people find attending planning meetings at 5 o'clock very difficult as members of the public. To be fair to them, they get there as quickly as they can, but it is an additional burden when you're already quite emotionally strung quite often on the planning committee, because you're either very much for it or very much against it, and you don't know which side you're going to come out on. But normally I would vote for a timetable of meetings because it's essential, but we're having inconsistencies in the approaches from the controlling group. We were told at the last full council with regards to the managing director position, we can't wait to the next council, this full council's got to deal with it. Then we're having, oh, you can deal with the scrutiny arrangements at the next annual council. This isn't fair, it's not consistent, it just seems to be the answer which suits the controlling group depending on the situation they're facing, whether they're in hot water or not. If it's an issue where they're in trouble, they're happy to push it off to the next annual council because a number of them, either through natural selection, who are standing down, or through whatever results come up, won't be there. But on other issues, they're quite happy to ram things through quite speedily before the election. And I don't think that this timetable is sufficient. Councillor Harvey has mentioned about, oh, you can slot in an extra OSP here, an extra OSP there. It just goes to show he's only done 2 years of OSPs. Those of us who have done a number of years on the OSPs, and Shirley does a fantastic job in trying to coordinate everything, but you will never satisfy everyone all of the time when you are trying to arrange an ad hoc meeting. Not everyone can get to them. And as Councillor Condon pointed out, those of us who can, we will put these in our diary at the start and work to them. But removing the scrutiny function, which if we follow Councillor Harvey's suggestion, will have an additional cost. So I don't think you'll get the £9,000 savings which was put in the budget. So was the budget sufficiently robust in that fashion that was presented by the leader? Probably not, because actually if you slot in extra meetings, let's keep the building open, the porters, the officers' attendance, all of that has to be factored in. So as it stands, this schedule of meetings is not sufficient for the work of this council. And I will not vote for anything which undermines the ability of us as backbench members on either side of the chamber. Because actually, people, when I sit in scrutiny, we do actually have good ideas and actually agree with each other in scrutiny. That is where some of the best work of this council is done, is in scrutiny, and to reduce that in the timetable of meetings is not fair and is not on in my book, so I won't vote for it.
It's been moved and seconded the recommendations in relation to the timetable of...
Mr Mayor, I think it has to be replied to, because first of all, I don't agree with Councillor Margaret. This council meeting, full council, has always been at 6 o'clock since 1974. What we have to bear in mind, Mr Mayor, is everybody does not have a car in this borough, and there are very few bus routes that run late. I'm one of the lucky ones. I live on the 48 route. Perhaps one or two of the other people that are out here live on the 48 route. But if you don't, you can't get home after a certain time, after 7:30. You have to, the last 48 runs after 9. So let's think about those people, Mr Mayor, and let's not assume that everybody has the same working day. They don't. Some people work in the evenings, some people work afternoons, some people work at night. We can't please everybody. But what we are doing, Mr Mayor, is setting down, I didn't come up with these, this is officers who've come up with a pattern of meetings to fit what needs to be done through the year. But Mr Mayor, I shan't be at any of these meetings, thank goodness. And you know, from what the opposition say, I'm surprised they didn't say here after that. But Mr Mayor, this is a reasonable series of meetings, and there can be slight alterations during the year.
Thank you. All those in favour of the recommendations? And against? And abstentions? That's carried.
Thank you. I was on this screening panel, and it's really important we do get rid of sky lanterns. and it is part of an education programme, because what goes up in the sky will eventually hit water or land, and as soon as it hits water it gets washed into the sea. If it's left on land, animals eat it, animals get trapped, and if it lands on a building, we've had a big waste fire where it landed in a waste recycling place in Birmingham, millions of pounds of damage, jobs lost. There's been so much damage to these lanterns, but I think it's part of a bigger education programme about looking after what we just sort of let up into the sky. And there is a responsibility, and I'm glad to see it mentions talking about the responsibility of balloons as well, because a lot of animals actually eat balloons, ingest them, and have problems. And if they hit into water courses, they can go and get washed down into the sea. We know what problems there are with dolphins and whales and everything, eating balloons and plastic in the sea. So I really support this, but also hope we actually keep the effort up to actually make people more responsible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I fully support this. I have seen the outcome of sky lanterns in my profession. I've seen animals dying through this. Basically, they fall down in the grass, the animals chew them, and then they die. I've seen fields of corn destroyed with the lantern drops down, burns a straw. I fully support it. Thank you.
I'd like to put a human element to this. One of the sky lanterns, when my son was about 8 months old, he was out in the back garden in his pram, and one of them gracefully floated over the hedge and very nearly ended up in his face. So I'm quite happy to support this, because I think as lovely as they look in the air, they're actually quite dangerous, and they do pose a risk to people as well as property and animals.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I was on the panel that looked at this, and I certainly am in favour of the ban. I have to say, I was at a family wedding in Ayrshire 3 or 4 years ago, and sky lanterns were handed out to everybody. I hadn't a clue what they were. We were all to light them, and well, as far as I was concerned, I was more interested in what was happening back at the wedding, inside, and having a drink and a bit of Scottish dancing and whatever. So, although I had one, mine didn't actually take off. And the following morning, when we're all sitting there having breakfast in the hotel, the gathering, it was on the news about a sky lantern that had caused a problem, not far from where we were. Now, I have no idea if any of my family or the other family were guilty with that one, but I do have the first-hand knowledge that that happened. And then when I got this paperwork, I think you've only got to go, when you look at the background, to 3.6 examples of the type of issues caused. It's quite horrendous, the damage they can do. There is the animal issue and all that, and of course I agree entirely with that, but it's just amazing the damage that they can do. And I have to say, and I made the comment at the OSP as well, I think they're so last year. They're gone. It's an old thing. Get rid of them anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like Liz has said, I'm fully in support of this, and I won't reiterate the reasons why and the good points made by others. I'll just seek a little bit of clarification if possible, if I'm just able to ask a question. On 2.1, where it did say voluntary ban, you said actually it's a ban, not a voluntary ban. Does that mean that on page 86, where 4.2, where it says a voluntary ban is not legally enforceable, if it was a ban rather than a voluntary ban, does that mean that it could then be legally enforced, and if so, how? And what could the potential penalties be for anyone that goes against that ban?
Going off what Phil's saying, we can already build this into the council tenancy anyway on the housing part of it. This is why it's came to full council, is because it covers so many portfolios. So it covers housing, parks, school, so there's so many. So we can build that into the housing tenancy and have it as a voluntary ban on parks and leisure.
Okay, it's, do you want to watch the reply or I think it's been moved and seconded, the recommendations was printed. All those in favour of that?
Sorry, just a minute.
All those in favour of that? And against? And abstentions? Okay, that's approved. Moves on to the annual report of the overview of the scrutiny panels. Can I, from the chair, actually move that report, but I would like to be a friendly critic if I can, and if I can ask the officers and the responsible portfolio holder to try and make sure that next time we get a report such as this, that at least the font size is the size that we can easily read. That's secondly. Any member? Councillor Connick? Sorry, it's just questions and answers. It's not debate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to ask the chair of the Planning and Environment OSC. They haven't actually produced a report, it's just a table here. In the old days we had a nice proper report, but I'd like to ask the chair of the Planning and Environment OSC why we haven't had a proper debate for a plan during the last year and why at the OSC. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm being informed that I can't actually read it, so I'm told it's not on the table that's in front of us. Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. May I ask the Chair of the Planning and Environment Overview Scrutiny Committee, in view of some of the reservations, concerns and bad feelings of the Bedworth allotment holders during the process, which was ongoing with the working group being set up, can you ensure, assuming if you continue this role in the future, arguing scrutiny arrangement, whether it's OSP 1 or OSP 2, can we ensure that an open dialogue is kept with the Bedworth Allotment Association holders, and that if they have any concerns that arise over the next few years, that they can be swiftly sort of amended and resolved by the Borough Council?
Thanks for that, Councillor Grant. I'm sure you was at the last one when the Bedworth Allotment Association came, and they was quite happy with the way things had progressed and are progressing. They'll be working with the officers to make sure that everything goes through smoothly. If they've got any problems, they will see that with the last one.
Okay, the item has been moved and seconded. All those in favour? And against? And abstentions? Okay. Item number 14 is the Cabinet report. Mr. Harvey?
Mr. Mayor, I move the Cabinet report in front of you that I'm happy the whole. To ask questions, to answer questions. I've got a fair number of last questions there, but I won't answer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to ask the Leader of the Council, item about, it's actually on page 93, about the West Midlands Combined Authority growth deal, etc. We've got a great opportunity to have improved services. Lots is going on with this growth deals and things, but what seems to be happening is the need seems to be getting left down to the rail connections. There is a possibility there'll be a new train service from Coventry to Leicester, and they might spend £50 million bypassing the Nuneaton to actually get better and quicker connection between Coventry and Leicester. Where are we, and why isn't these sort of things being discussed by you at this council to bring back what's happening at the combined authority? There seems to be a weakness, and can you tell us what your your replacement should be doing to get a better deal from these growth deals?
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'm not imbued with powers of prediction of what Councillor Condico is going to say at every meeting. Thank goodness. Of course I've been talking about Nuneaton and Bedworth's needs. One of the reasons Nuneaton and Bedworth has had 10 times the amount of money back from the West Midlands that we've put in for a start. I think if Councillor Condico was actually at these meetings, which are open to the public, mainly in Birmingham Town Hall, he would realise that I'm one of the best defenders there. But we can't be in every single aspect of every single part of this, Mr. Mayor. And the West Midlands conurbation in terms of metropolitans put in a vast amount of money and have different powers to us. The county council, on which Councillor Condico also sits, is the transport authority, not us.
Okay, thank you. That just takes us on to, just a thank you. It's the end of the meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance. For those people that we won't be seeing again in a council meeting, thank you very much for everything you've done in the past. And can I declare the meeting closed? Thank you. All rise, please.